This is better than the webinar because we can see everyone and we can talk to each other.
That's right. How are you, Lynn? Are things better in Australia?
No, we've got mandatory face masks now when we go out. We've had some spikes, but nothing where like the US or Europe. So we've got restrictions, mandated face masks.
I was thinking fire-wise.
Pardon?
I was thinking about fires when I said what was.
There are a few, but nothing like last year.
Yeah.
Nothing like last year.
That's
We're
good.
all obsessed with coronavirus instead. So we're not going anywhere.
Hi, John Wisman. Good to see you.
So Deb, you ready?
I am, Bill. Ready when you are.
Great. It is a great pleasure to be introducing my friend Deb Figart, this year's recipient of the Veblen-Commons Award. Deb has been a valued colleague of mine my entire professional career, and I mean this in a very serious way. Whenever I begin new research or reworking a course, as I proceed, I nearly always find work by Deb and her incredible collaborators that facilitates moving my work forward, usually in more productive ways than I envisioned. A perusal of her CV documents an exceedingly prolific research career, indeed too many publications to recount. But on this occasion, I want to reflect upon the significance and quality of her contributions to original institutional economics. Her book, co-authored with Ellen Matari and Marilyn Power, Living Wages, Equal Wages, changed the way we think about wages and gender by expanding the notion of wages into three interrelated categories: wages as a living, wages as a price, and wages as a social practice. Wages as a price are manifestations of treating labor as what Karl Polanyi called a fictitious commodity, and our friend Robert Prasch called treating labor like broccoli. But once wages are understood as both a means to the end in view of securing a living in a social practice, and thus the result of discretionary individual and collective behavior, never again can we think about wage determination or even what wages mean without considering the significant social, cultural, and gender dimensions of the consequences of the social processes of setting wages. Her book with Ellen Matari, Just One More Hand, is a classic example of institutionalist case study qualitative research. Though often cited, Charles Wilbur and Robert Harrison's famous Journal of Economic Issues article on the methodology of storytelling and pattern modeling presented the arguments for justifying and sustaining such scholarship. But the real power of these methods are shown in their best applications. Matari and Figart's book is certainly one of those best applications. Not only do Matari and Figart tell a compelling story about the labor conditions of workers in casinos, but in this grounded qualitative research, they also undercut the neoliberal con job used by gaming corporations and developers. In an unholy partnership, they convince desperate local community decision makers to subsidize these hit and run operations who promise jobs and economic opportunities and ultimately crush those hopes to the detriment of those communities. Most recently, Professor Figart's book, Stories of Progressive Institutional Change, provides a collection of case studies illustrating the potential of original institutional economic research to shed light and give policy direction regarding some of our most pressing problems. In each of her case studies, a contemporary problem is identified and analyzed. Deb describes the affected people and our communities and their collective action in pursuit of possible solutions to their problems. Finally, she invites the reader to explore additional resources and challenges them to engage in their own collective action for the purpose of solving pressing social and economic problems. In the pandemic term of spring 2020, this book saved me and my students. Forced into exclusively online interactions, I embraced this book. It engaged my students, caused them to explore the stories further using online resources, created lively discussions, and reduced their isolation by compelling them to look beyond themselves. It gave me and my students renewed purpose for our studies and our futures. I have used each of these well-researched, tightly reasoned, and engaging books in the teaching of the original institutional economics over the years. These are the books, arguments, and analyses that have engaged my students the most. And of course, they should, because Professor Figart and her distinguished co-authors demonstrate institutional economics in action. Her work as an editor of important volumes with an impressive number of prominent co-editors is frankly astonishing them, and you can read about those in the printed version. Professor Vigart's journal articles, also featuring many distinguished co-authors, are published in many important journals, in addition to the Journal of Economic Issues, of course, in our sister journal, the Review of Social Economy, and they are listed. As I went through this incredible body of work, listing my favorites on a list entitled Deb's Greatest Hits, it became clear that even if I simply listed them, there would be no time for Deb's Veblen-Commons address. So instead, I want to use one to characterize the quality of her work. The article is Social Responsibility for Living Standards. This is her presidential address to the Association for Social Economics. I use this article in teaching the economics of care. In our world, dominated by neoliberal ideology, people accept the notion that care should be quarantined in the private realm of the household because an ethic of care is anathema to the ethic of self-interest and the requirement of individual autonomy in the neoliberal public realm. Care in the public realm is a pathology. After defining care, arguing for a social obligation to care, and establishing that the need to care is beyond the capacity of households, only then can I begin to address the possibility of collective social care in the public realm. Of course, you then immediately encounter the neoliberal tropes regarding what kind, how much, and how to pay for care. Professor Figart's article helps cut through many of the latter set of questions with a compelling analysis. She describes the purpose of economic activity as the provisioning of the material means of life, a description that runs through heterodox economics and is foundational for institutional and feminist economics. Next, she describes well-being. She writes, our standard of living thus includes all of the preconditions for our personal well-being, tangible as well as intangible, privately owned commodities, public goods and services, and domestically organized social reproduction. It also entails the cultural context and social institutions that enable or inhibit the preconditions for human flourishing. Noting that there are three possible candidates for ensuring living standards, namely households, businesses, and the state, she explores each in turn. She notes living wages hold potential, but the social responsibility for caring, which is highly gendered, must be addressed. The commodification of caring in the neoliberal market provides care for those who can pay, but those who cannot must fend for themselves. Thus, necessarily, some responsibility will ultimately fall on the state. She, like many institutionalists, believes jobs matter. She outlines a policy agenda. Quote, to promote progressive institutional change, part of the task still involves making jobs better, demanding that employers acknowledge their social responsibility and provide living wages and socially necessary benefits that are not provided by the state. We need to improve part-time and contingent jobs and discourage overwork so that paid employment does not crowd out other aspects of people's lives. From the state, we need paid family and medical leave, effective income replacement programs for the poor, and publicly provided health care and child care. We need to ensure that jobs are allocated with dignity and without discrimination. And she concludes, In addition to changes in public policy, we also need to practice a different kind of economics. How we practice economics reflects our conceptions of our subject matter, how we define economics, and perhaps more importantly, how we define what an economy is, connects with the values we hold as academics and as human beings. Social provisioning is an apt way of viewing economic systems because it incorporates social values beyond material acquisition and emphasizes human agency. Her analysis is compelling. In fact, I wish I had written it. Professor Figart quickly moves the reader past and through the ideology to a serious consideration of policy proposals that attend to efficacy, dignity, care, and compassion. To me, this is what has always been what being an institutional and social economist is all about. This brings me to another very important aspect of Professor Figart's work. Much of it is done collaboratively, especially with a partner, Ellen Mutari. Her many successful collaborations have contributed to the growth of both original institutional economics in particular and pluralist economics in general. She is an unabashed institutionalist, feminist, social, and radical economist. She has always positioned herself in the profession as a progressive, pragmatic, problem-solving, activist institutional economist. Today, with this award, we honor her many contributions and her commitment to our cause. Deb.
Bill, hugs.
Always.
Hugs. And a lot of what you said is going to be picked up in my talk today. So folks, we are in a meeting, not a webinar. So it's really nice that I get to see you if you want to keep your video on. But please turn your microphone off, turn yourself to mute, and that means you now, Bill. And we will open it up again after my address. We can open up the video and you can turn on your microphones again. Greg Hayden, your mic is on. Justin, your mic is on. Please, everybody, turn your mics off. I'm going to share my screen. All right. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you, AFI. Thanks for the work of the AFI Awards Committee. Thank you, Bill Waller, for nominating me and for that wonderful, heartwarming introduction. I'm surprised I'm holding it together. My work over the years has benefited from the mentorship of 4 JEI editors now. I guess that means I'm getting old. Ann Mayhew, Glenn Atkinson, Chris Brown, and now Bill Waller. I've also benefited from working with numerous book editors over the years who have coached me, especially Mark Toole and Dale Bush, Janice Peterson and Meg Lewis, Del Champlin and Janet Knedler, Martha Starr, John Davis, Jane Wheelock, Mary King, Bob McMaster, and others. I've had many other influential colleagues and co-authors over the years that have made me a better thinker and a better writer, especially Ellen Mutari, June Lapidus, Marilyn Power, Lonnie Golden, Heidi Hartman, John Wisman, Randy Albelda, Zoreh Imami, Barbara Hopkins, Tonya Warnicki, and the list goes on. So I'm going to talk for 30 minutes and then we'll open it up to questions and answers and comments from wonderful AFI folks. It started out as a query on the AFI listserv in 2002. Someone suggested that we post a top 10 list of policies that would be promoted by original institutional economists. So I posted, it generated some positive discussion. I turned it into an ASSA paper and it was accepted into the June JEI. And then Toole and Bush approached me and helped me enrich this paper theoretically, and it came out a longer version in their book. What motivated me then was great inequality in the labor market, invidious distinctions by class, race, gender, citizenship status, etc., all accentuated by neoliberalism. So that time, 2003, was 18 years following my dissertation. So I'm going to call that mid-career for me. And my research was on pay equity, working time, and minimum and living wages, and poverty and other things. Now, fast forward 18 years later, what I'm going to call late career for me, my aim with this Veblen-Commons address is to revisit some of my earlier work centered around that top 10 list, given that our economy and institutions have evolved since then. So the order of my paper is as follows. Number one, and the address, I'm going to summarize the old top 10 list of labor market policies from 2003 and any progress toward accomplishing them. Number two, I'll discuss evolutions in the institutional context of work since then. And number three, I'm going to share and describe a brand new top 10 list for 2021. Let's have some fun with policy today. Theoretically, my work draws from major concepts in institutional economics, invidious distinctions, progressive institutional change, countervailing power, social balance, and I draw on broader heterodox work, including capabilities theory, social provisioning, and caring labor. So first, we will revisit what I wrote in 2003. Drum roll, here was my top 10 list in 2003. Number one, create good jobs for part-time, contingent, and temporary workers. Number two, extend overtime penalties to uncovered workers. Number three, raise the federal minimum wage. Number four, decouple health insurance from employment. Number five, adopt living wage ordinances. Number six, count and value unpaid labor. 7, legislate real welfare reform. 8, mandate paid family and medical leave. 9, strengthen affirmative action. And 10, remove loopholes from the Equal Pay Act. We've had some progress at the federal level, thanks to activists, President Obama, and the Congress of the United States. With number 4 on the list, you know, we have the Affordable Care Act of 2010, which set up exchanges for individuals to purchase health insurance and some other features that are wonderful for our students and pre-existing conditions. It's not universal, but it makes a step toward providing access to part-time and contingent workers, making their jobs better. In number 10, removing loopholes from the Equal Pay Act, this is Lilly Ledbetter, wonderful woman. She filed a case for pay discrimination that went all the way up to the Supreme Court of the United States. Her pay discrimination was discovered by her late in her career at Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company. The Supreme Court ruled against her because they said that discrimination was discovered after the statute of limitations expired. Well, here's RBG's dissent color. Ruth Bader Ginsburg wrote a fervent dissent calling on Congress to remedy this. So Congress did and passed the Lilly Ledbetter Act, which President Obama signed, and it renews the statute of limitations with each new paycheck. So we've had some gains, some lesser gains, and also a setback. I was very hopeful in 2003 about the American Time Use Survey, that it would provide data on unpaid work, and it has. We have lots of data, and we have even shadow accounts to account for unpaid work in our valued contributions in the economy. But we've never moved to the point of changing the definition of GDP or creating an alternative definition of economic welfare. And we've had a setback. Late in his presidency, President Obama tried to add more workers that would, like assistant managers, that would be covered by the overtime provisions of the Fair Labor Standards Act. That rule change, regulatory rule change, was blocked by a judge and eventually ixnayed by the Trump administration. We've had some state and local models that have proven successful at accomplishing some of these things on my list. The federal minimum wage was raised to $7.25 in 2009, but it's been stuck there ever since. However, 29 states and the District of Columbia, as of last New Year's Eve, have minimum wages higher than the federal. Paid family and medical leave in the United States is not paid, is unpaid, but 8 states in DC now have paid family and medical leave funded through payroll taxes, like unemployment insurance and disability. In terms of contingent work, 8 states now protect domestic workers by mandating written contracts that specify things such as scheduled hours, breaks, paid overtime, and sick days. So these and other initiatives and models have inspired my new list, my new top 10 list. But first, the next part of the paper talks about changes in the economy since 2003. What we've had is a decline of jobs and a rise of gigs. In 2003, jobs were eroding, but still an aspirational norm. Recall number 1 on my old list was a concern for part-time and contingent workers. And while we didn't have digital platforms at the time and gigs like Uber, I did think about this, and it's what I was talking about in my concern for the growth of contingent work. Now, by 2021, unfortunately, precariousness is emerging as a new norm. We've had a rise of what we call the gig economy, defined as more than just work allocated via digital platforms such as Uber and Airbnb. The term, I think, encompasses multiple ways that risk and precariousness have been shifted from employers to those performing the work. So we're talking about contingent work and part-time work and temporary jobs and intermittent work on and off, and working at unsocial hours of the night or weekends, and irregular work schedules, a big problem. Workers here face income variability and are shouldering the cost of their own benefits. And we have greedy work, increasingly controlling non-work hours. So job characteristics in some that were once viewed as secondary are moving into the mainstream, increasing economic inequality and insecurity, unfortunately. Now we have a pandemic, and the pandemic is making everything worse. It's intensifying inequality. So we have a public health crisis intertwined with an economic crisis. So I saw a study using IRS data that projected that there will be 37.2 million fewer W-2 classified jobs for 2021. Many jobs lost in the pandemic may never return as stable employment, gigs maybe. Bloomberg Businessweek even indicates gig employment is rising while the rest of the service sector crumbles. Low-income gig workers are servicing high-paid white-collar employees working from their homes. So health risk is diverging by race and class. And of course, gendered hierarchies are intersecting with class. For example, for professionals, the high pay that comes with long, inflexible, and unpredictable hours is leading some heterosexual couples to revert to the traditional division of labor. If you look at the labor force participation rate of women with children during the pandemic, it's plunging. So the gig economy is an extension of neoliberalism to the institutional organization of work. For employers, labor is treated as an input cost to be minimized. For workers, gigs are potential income streams. The social relationship between the employer and the employee frays. This, I argue, is a realization of neoclassical labor economics. Work generates only disutility, not identity or purpose. And as I have argued in my research, institutional economics is different. Jobs are a source of identity and purpose. Workers seek to create meaning and purpose in their work, and surveys bear this out. Work contributes to societal well-being. So we need a new paradigm. We need something, we could perhaps call it a new progressivism. I'm not the only one to use this term, but I like it. Economic crises such as the one we are in can bring paradigm shifts and structural change. The legitimacy of neoliberalism is now being challenged in two ways. One way is by patriarchal and white supremacist authoritarian nationalism opposed to free market globalization from the right. This is Trumpism. But the second, more hopeful way is by a movement for inclusion and democratization from the left. Here's what Joe Stiglitz has said. The credibility of neoliberalism's faith in unfettered markets as the surest road to prosperity is on life support these days. So I think, though, that our policy proposals today cannot simply hearken back to the supposedly golden age of the post-war period. This period, remember, strengthened one sector of the middle class while perpetuating racism, male breadwinner norms, and the extraction of resources from the rest of the world. Let's get to the fun part. I'm going to reveal a top 10 list for today in a moment. And when you look at it, I think you'll see two themes. One, we still need to fight for good jobs. A good job, according to Ellen Mutari and me in our book on the casino industry, a good job is one that helps you create a life and reinforces a positive sense of identity. Jobs need to provision for our material needs. Of course they do. Creating a life, though, also means having health and safety on the job. And jobs need to provide time and resources to support family and community life. And also, surveys show the experience of work itself is important. So that's the first theme I think you'll see. The second theme I think you'll see is who is responsible for assuring living standards. Here I seek to put the social back into provisioning and talk about social provisioning. So jobs matter, of course, but so too does being a parent, a volunteer, or some other identity that is important to you. And we need to shift more responsibility for living standards away from employment. And we need to value caring. So this means less reliance on wages for provisioning and an increased role of government services. I think somebody has their mic on. Could you please check and turn it off? So, here's my new list. The new list is color coded only because it's going to be important later on when I compare 2021 with the list from 2023, where I've lumped some things together based upon similar theme. Number 1, decouple health insurance from employment. Sounds familiar from the old list. Number 2, raise and index the federal minimum wage to a living wage. Number 3, increase regulation of work schedules. Number 4, mandate paid sick leave. 5, legislate paid family and medical leave. 6, fund childcare and universal preschool. 7, amend the payroll tax to modernize it and value caregivers. 8, expand the social safety net through a universal child allowance. 9, strengthen laws and practices to achieve workplace equality. And number 10, reinvigorate the labor movement by protecting the right to organize. Let's explore these. The good news on all of these is we're ready to go. We have numerous policies and practices and pilot projects ready for the national stage, owing to successful implementation already in many US states and localities. And we have a lot of research about this from nonprofit think tanks. So we're ready to go. Number 1, still on my list, decouple health insurance from employment. It's number 1, and my list is not in rank order except for this one, because health as a basic capability undergirds all of human flourishing. And access to healthcare services and health insurance boosts job quality for every job. And you know what? People support it in the US. Kaiser Family Foundation tracking poll, majority support for a considerable period of time. Number 2, raise and index the federal minimum wage to a living wage. We have progressive activists and unions that have fought for the fight for $15 an hour for many years now. And there has been progress with state minimum wages and local initiatives, and even large companies that have a $15 minimum, including Target, Amazon, Costco, and Bank of America, among others. Federally, we have a Raise the Wage Act bill. It passed the US House. I support it. It would be a stepwise increase to $15 an hour by 2025 and indexed to the median wage thereafter. So the indexing is very important. It means you don't have to go begging the next time you need an increase. It would immediately help 28 to 34 million minimum wage workers, but it also would help more workers on the minimum wage contour. Workers whose wages are slightly above the minimum wage, whose wages are tied to the minimum wage, but they are a little higher and you have to preserve wage relativities in an organization. The other thing the bill would do, it would finally phase out the paltry $2.13 federal per hour wage for tipped employees and move to a straight hourly minimum. Number 3 on my list, increase regulation of work schedules. This is a real problem today. The hashtag schedules that work movement is a pivotal battleground in the gig economy today. The problem is a lot of unpredictable hours of work and variable hours of work. You can't build a life with unpredictable hours. And short hours. Do you know that people show up for a work shift and their employers send them home early if business is slow and they're not paid for those hours where they're sent away? That's a serious problem for workers. So is the process of something called clopening, which Starbucks used to do, but has backed off from. Clopening is working different shifts, like staying late at night to close the shop after midnight, cleaning up, and then having to report a few hours later at 4 a.m. to open the shop for the morning shift. So we've had some success at the state and local level here, led by New York State, the Attorney General and state attorneys generals at state attorneys general. They have used existing labor law in 8 states and the District of Columbia to enforce reporting pay. You report to work for your scheduled shift, whatever that is, and you will make a maximum amount or a goodly portion amount of what you are due for that shift. But even better than that are some broader Fair Work Week laws in 5 US cities, including my own, the city of Philadelphia, and a new statewide Oregon law that requires advanced schedules to be posted and a little bit more schedule predictability for workers. Federally, we have a bill, Schedules That Work Act. It requires advanced schedules, reporting pay, call-in pay for unscheduled last-minute work on call. It has not passed yet. Number 4 is mandate paid sick leave. The problem in the US is there's no federal law requiring paid sick leave. As of 2020, 13 US states and DC have enacted laws to mandate paid sick leave, and kudos to Connecticut for being the first in 2011. Now, interestingly enough, we had temporary limited paid sick leave as part of a Coronavirus Relief Act, but that expired last New Year's Eve. The solution is another federal bill, the Healthy Families Act. It would call for 1 hour of sick leave paid for every 30 hours of work. So this helps some part-time workers. It would be for a maximum of 7 sick days per year, not enough, but it's a start. And it would apply to employers with 15 or more employees. Number 5, legislate paid family and medical leave. As you know, in the United States, leave is now unpaid. We had, in that same Coronavirus Relief Act, temporary limited family and medical leave that was paid if you had the virus or if you were caring for somebody with the virus, but it expired last New Year's Eve. We have 5 states in DC, though, that have paid family and medical leave funded through the payroll tax. 4 states have passed it recently and are implementing paid leave between now and 2021. Federally, we have a bill, the Family Act. It would provide 12 weeks of partially paid family and medical leave funded through payroll taxes. The good news is that nearly all workers would be covered. It hasn't passed yet. Number 6. Fund childcare and universal preschool. We have a twin problem with childcare in the United States. There aren't enough quality slots, and it costs a lot of money. It is a large and increasingly share of young family budgets. Quality childcare is practically not affordable. I'm arguing that the social responsibility for childcare raises living standards and serves as social infrastructure. There are a lot of alternative proposals out there. President-elect Biden's proposal is influenced by Elizabeth Warren's proposal when she was on the campaign trail. And her proposal called for free childcare for families earning under 200% of the poverty line. It called for childcare tax credits for other families and federal funding of universal pre-kindergarten. A more moderate approach has been taken in several cities that focuses on expanding pre-kindergarten, but access has been thus far very limited. There is a new model, though, in Multnomah County, Oregon, which is mostly the city of Portland, that is terrific. Check into it, and it includes paying childcare workers decently. Number 7, amend the payroll tax and modernize it for caregivers. As you know, Social Security and Medicare in the US are funded through a very regressive payroll tax due to a cap on wages that are taxed, wages and salaries. It's the first this year, 130 some odd thousand of wages and salaries. So I would like to raise the FICA tax cap to what? Maybe 99th percentile of wages and salaries. I'm flexible here, but we've got to raise it. And I support the Social Security Caregiver Credit Act, which is a federal bill modeled after what many European pension schemes are doing. And that is to give year for year credit toward your Social Security if you have spent a year working full-time in the home as a caregiver. Number 8, expand the safety net through a universal child allowance. The problem in the US is that the Earned Income Tax Credit and the Child and Development Care Tax Credit are insufficient for supporting caring labor. It's much too little to deal with the rising costs of caring for kids. And furthermore, taxpayers with little to no income receive little benefit from these policies. So I call for, with other people, a universal child allowance that is not based on a parent's work status. There are plenty of examples of this in the European Union. In the US, proposals have ranged from $200 to $300 a month per child. Tim Wonder from AFI suggests $9,330 per year, more generous, based on the actual cost of raising a child from the USDA estimates. Number 9, strengthen laws and practices to achieve workplace equality. We have a federal bill, the Paycheck Fairness Act. It has been introduced in every session of Congress since 1997. We need to pass it. It would end pay secrecy because companies don't let you talk about your wage or salary with your fellow employees. It would end the use of wage history to set your current wages. It would call for equal pay for equal work in different business locations, ending one of the loopholes in the Equal Pay Act. It passed the House, but it is going nowhere in the Senate. Surprise, surprise. It doesn't go far enough, but it's a step. The other thing we need to do, though, is we need to address the racial wage gaps that are linked to structural problems outside the labor market, like mass incarceration. So things like ban the box on job applications as initial screening device are a good idea. Also eliminating barriers to occupational licensing, where you can't get an occupational license if you have a prior criminal record, and you need licenses to do a lot of jobs. The other thing that's a good idea is clean slate policies to expunge criminal records after a certain period of time, especially for minor drug offenses and marijuana offenses. And of course, we need better protections on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity through the proposed Equality Act. And the Equality Act passed the House last year. Finally, number 10, reinvigorate the labor movement by protecting and enhancing the right to organize. My grandfather was a coal miner. 2 of my uncles were Teamsters. My father was a member of the American Federation of Teachers. I am a member of the American Federation of Teachers. Unions have taken a beating in the neoliberal era because of aggressive anti-union behavior by employers. So there is a bill in the House, and the House passed it, the PRO bill, Protecting the Right to Organize Act. Among other things, it allows workers to sue employers who illegally interfere with organizing. It bars permanent replacements of workers who are out on strike or engaged in a work stoppage. And it tightens the definition of independent contractor to counter misclassification issues. So here's a comparison of my current list and my old list. And here the colors are coded for similar themes between the two periods of time, although there are 5 new things that appear on the new list, but they're not totally unrelated to things on the old list. In conclusion, this historical moment, when we are facing interconnected crises involving public health, inequality, and economic security, racial injustice, gender backlash, environmental disasters, and threats to democracy, this historical moment is precisely the moment to use political processes to spark progressive economic change. Good work, as I see it, means work in the paid labor market, work in the home, and work in our communities. It requires the institutionalization of countervailing power, addressing invidious distinctions based on class, race, and gender, and restoring social balance. Did I miss one of your suggested policies on my list? I bet I did. We can talk about it. I agree that my proposals cost money because they call for a larger role for the government in social provisioning. As John Kenneth Galbraith argues in The Affluent Society in 1958, our economy has prioritized private goods and services and underfunded public ones. So he argued this 63 years ago. It's even worse today. Rebalancing is necessary to pivot away from economic inequality and the insecurity of the gig economy. Thanks again to AFI and the awards committee for recognizing what you deem to be good work. I'm going to stop my screen share so I can see you. Let's open it up. Turn on your mics.
I have a question, Deb.
Yes, John Wisman.
First, I want to say how proud I am of you. I've been proud of you for a very long time. Simply the icing on the cake. But beyond that, my question is, over quite a few decades now, and increasingly politically embraced, is the idea of guaranteed employment. That does not make your list. Would you like to speak to that?
Yes, John, and that was on the bubble. I know you support a federal job guarantee. I know Derek Hamilton does, who spoke last night at the ASSA plenary. And I think the federal job guarantee or having a new works progress administration or new deal is worthy. It was on the bubble for me. It was on the bubble. So I don't know where I would put it, but it didn't make my list. But yes, it's important. It focuses a lot on paid work though. And notice that 5 things on my list are valuing the work that's not done for pay. Next up, John Davis has his hand raised. John Davis.
Hi, Deb. It's so wonderful to see you. Thank you for your excellent talk. Thank you for all your work for all these years. So much appreciated. I noticed Sandy Darity had some of the things that you had on your list. He had universal health insurance, what John Wisman just said, the employer of last resort, and he also had universal Wi-Fi. But the substance of the earlier ASE session was about wealth inequality, particularly racial wealth inequality. And the argument is that the tax laws that we have are so incredibly biased towards wealth accumulation for the high income, high wealth, white population. Could you possibly add something about changing the tax laws regarding wealth accumulation to your list, your current list?
John, I think that that's a very good idea. And I will remind folks that my list in 2003 and my list in 2021 are things that are related to the labor market. So I have a lot of things I would like to do, just like progressives do everywhere. And dealing with great wealth inequality is one of them. Talking about baby bonds, canceling student loan debt, having public banks, and all the other things in the Green New Deal. I'm all for it. But I would like to politely say that my list is a reframing of labor market policies or things directly related to the labor market.
Great, thank you.
I don't see any other hands up. Oh, Eugenia, good to see you. Please. You must be muted. I'm looking for you. Eugenia, we can't hear you.
Sorry. I'm asking why you don't put nothing about Social Security in your 10 points.
Well, I did call for Social Security caregiver credits in the United States based upon the models in European countries. And I did call for raising the cap so that it's not a regressive tax. Did you have something else in mind, Eugenia? Let's go to Daphne.
I'm thinking
Okay.
in countries in which really we need this universal social security, because we don't have good even in linking to the jobs, good social security for the retired people.
I agree it's insufficient. I agree it's insufficient. Daphne?
Yeah, I'm really, well, it was a great talk, first of all. Agreed with just about everything there, but do have a question about how functionally you would do these Social Security federal caregiver credits. Because it seems that you would have to have some kinds of audit if you were really going to understand not just who had children at home, but who had people that were disabled or elderly, and which could be temporary for various times. So I'm curious about how they do it in Europe and how you can do that without it being overly invasive.
Yes, I think that's an interesting question, which I don't have an immediate answer to. The details and the practicalities of how they do it in the European Union, and I would invite somebody at this meeting to answer that question. And I would just add that I support a wealth tax, but I haven't figured out yet, perhaps Elizabeth Warren has, but I haven't figured out yet how we're going to have an audit of everybody's art and things in their safe deposit boxes and their jewels and their boats and everything either.
Well, you're right. I mean, a lot of the time these things end up being partial implementations because of the trade-off of the practicality of auditing versus giving. But anyway, it's certainly a good idea to look at giving more caregiver credit.
Thank you, Daphne. Justin, you have your hand up.
Thank you very much for your talk. Please, I would like to understand what are some of the personal stories, that have shaped your views over time. And
that's
also,
a very good question.
and also, do you understand why some other people might have opposite views to you?
I'm an academic, and I've been teaching for a very long time, decades. So my ears are open to people who have different views than me. They have to be. And I am a problem solver, as Bill talked about in his intro, and ideally I want to work toward consensus. But personal stories, because I am a storyteller in a lot of my writing, and I believe in the storytelling methodology as appropriate for economics. I think that things that have affected me and influence my thinking and my life and my career is that I come from a union family where the union made it good for my family. My family was able to move into the middle class because of the union. But my family also suffered when I lost my mother when I was 11 years old. So our income was slashed, and my father was a recipient of the Social Security funds for children that become available to widows and widowers until I reached the majority age. So I already was a benefit of the public provision. Another thing that has affected my life and work is I am a white person, but I am affected by my gender identity, obviously. And I am also affected by being a member of the LGBTQ+ community. And so I have been a victim of discrimination and harassment, like many of my brothers and sisters. So I think we all have lenses and standpoint. My first television memory was John F. Kennedy's funeral. So I am of that generation that wants to try and make my country and the world a better place. So thank you for that question, Justin.
Thank you.
While people are fetching their questions, I have yet another question for you, Deb, and that is, where does your research go from here?
Well, I can tell you what I'm working on if you'd like, John. Would you like to know? Or are you asking for some big meta theory question?
No. Just you've accomplished so much, and there is a trajectory to what you've been doing. What is the continuation of that trajectory?
Several things. One, I'm working to get a public bank established in the city of Philadelphia and the state of New Jersey. So my work on supporting public banks is going directly to politicians, and I've been an activist, scholar activist, public scholar in my life. So I am working with state and city government on that. Ellen Mutari and I are going to take our decades and decades of teaching experience, teaching social workers and other human services professionals economics, and writing a textbook for social workers and other human services professionals. Because when students who are in human services come into our economics class, and economics is often required for graduation, they do not need to open up a textbook and think about self-interest and utility maximization and profit maximization when they care about people and well-being. So we're tearing everything down and rebuilding it anew and drawing from various theoretical perspectives as appropriate, but focused on educating the next generation of social workers and other human services professionals. And I will continue working to support labor unions and doing research on work as is needed. And I'll have more time to do that now. Thank you, John. Thank you for your comments in the chat. Everyone who has commented, Tim, Kalpin. Lynn Chester has her hand up. Lynn, my friend.
Hi, Deb. I'm in awe. That was inspirational, and I feel ashamed that I have not done the depth of research that you have. I'm a bit more narrow on my energy, but it was absolutely inspirational. I just wanted to go back to one item on your list, childcare. And I asked this question partly in a little ignorance of funding arrangements, education funding arrangements across the states. But one of the issues that's come up here in Australia is trying to think outside the square about the provision of childcare and not to perpetuate this pricing system or a subsidy system that's separate from the education system, so that we actually expand our education system to start with childcare or pre-kindergarten care and then to continue through the various stages. So that raises funding implications for governments. And I just wonder if in your thinking about the provision and funding of childcare, you've thought about alternative models. And I raise that because I think underpinning a lot of your top 10, there's a lot of options there about alternative models rather than use the old frameworks to achieve those sorts of changes. And I'm thinking in terms of what I'm trying to do and break down those old models in terms of getting energy justice for low-income renters.
Yes. Thank you, Lynn. One of the things, and I've been influenced by Ellen Mutari here, and her work on the deficiency of childcare places, and also the deficiency of childcare in our 24/7, 365 economy, where the norm is you work 9 to 5 and you drop the kids off before work and you pick them up after work, which doesn't exist anymore. That norm is well, it might be the norm, but not like it used to be. So all I can say is, from what I've read, limited as a social scientist, children do well when they're around other children. The children do well when they start learning earlier as opposed to later, hence pre-K. Children learn all kinds of skills and abilities and social things when they're in group settings and they get exposed to things that boost their immunity systems. And so I'm leaning toward models, supporting models that build up small businesses with living wage jobs that provide high quality childcare in our communities, either close to our homes or close to our paid work. It's not that I don't support at-home care, but from what I have read, children do very well when they're around other children and they learn social skills and whatnot. Is that anything, responding to anything that you asked, Lynn? Do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about scale and at what you make and what you said about availability. I mean, the 9 to 5 model doesn't work. And we here have quite punitive system. Like if you don't pick up your child by 6 o'clock, you are fined or you're locked out.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that is really, really difficult for so many workers that have 2 or 3 casual jobs to manage. And that's why I'm trying to think, and it's not just for childcare, but to think we've got to break the old model of provisioning and pricing, because it prices people out of childcare. But what are the ways to do it? And it's not just, oh, we advocate more government funding of services. And I think you've started to unravel it a little bit for me when you talk about more localised provisioning closer to good jobs that pay living wages. And maybe this is where employer provisioning needs to come into the mix in some sort of way. There are a number of utility companies here in Australia that started to provide their own childcare for their employees, but they were big utility companies. So anyway, you've sparked my thinking about sort of new models.
About workplace childcare. If we are in a true gig economy and we have stable jobs that are becoming less stable, we have to have a multifaceted approach to the provision of childcare. It can't just be provided by large, wealthy Fortune 500 companies. It has to be provided in our communities by people who want these jobs if they are paid well and who are skilled to do them. And it has to be available to gig workers as well, childcare.
Yeah, and I won't take up any more time, but I think I'd link it to your living wage, because the problem with childcare providers is they're not paid living wages.
Right.
But I'll let others turn.
Right. Ellen, thank you, Lynn. Ellen Mutari has her hand up. Ellen. Ellen, you're muted. Ellen Mutari, you're muted. Ellen. Ellen, we can't hear you. Ellen, I'm sorry, we can't hear you. Alicia Giron, why don't you go while Ellen sorts out her microphone issues. Alicia Giron. Hello, Alicia. Alicia, unmute yourself. Go ahead, Ellen. Ellen, you're up.
Deb, you are unmuting me.
I unmuted everybody to try and help people who are muted. Alicia or Ellen?
It looks to me like Ellen took away her picture when maybe what she meant to do was unmute, because she's still muted and it's black.
Ah, Alicia, I can see you. I can't hear you, Alicia. Alicia or Ellen, why don't you ask your questions in the chat and I will read them. How's that? Thank you for your comment, Tim Wonder, who has no camera or mic. He likes the top 10 list. Ellen, is that you?
Yes, I'm back. I had to reset things in my iPad.
How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you very much, Deb. I just was going to briefly mention, respond to Lynn on childcare, that the problem with focusing on education as pre-K policies do is linked to the 24/7 issue. But I also wanted to say that I think it's really important for us to reconceptualize childcare as a form of infrastructure that enables workers to be more stable, as well as boosting local economic development. Again, this idea of small local businesses, hopefully paying living wages, is really important to local economic development. So I think we need to think about the macro implications of childcare as a way of conceptualizing it, and not think of it as just something to help as helping workers. That's one piece of it, but also something that helps communities and makes communities more attractive and viable, and economically competitive.
Thank you. Alicia, if you've sorted out your problem, go ahead. If not, feel free, anyone, to ask a question using the chat. The chat is open. The chat is open so that we can all see it, just so you know, we can all see it. And thank you, John Watkins.
We'll talk.
Ramon asked a question in the chat. He says, you said Uberization and things like that create disutility. I didn't say that it creates disutility. I said that it's part of the gig economy. And yes, I believe in entrepreneurship and the entrepreneur of the self. And I talk about that in the longer written paper, that sometimes people choose things. They choose gigs in order to do other things, to support other activities in life, if not just being an entrepreneur, but also to support maybe a writing career or a musical career or an acting career. Daphne has her hand up. Daphne.
Sorry, that must be from earlier that I had my hand up, but you
Okay.
answered my question, so no problem.
All right, last call, wonderful AFI folks. The chat is open.
Deborah, I think I have already arranged my microphone.
Oh, Alicia, we hear you.
Yes, I'm sorry. I was in the iPhone, and I don't know why I just couldn't do it. So I passed to the computer. Well, yes, I was hearing you, and it was very interesting. But one of the things that it will be very useful in your research is to put employment in the UMSCA, in the TEMEC, in the North American agreement. It is very important to see how are we going to solution the migration problem, especially because the migration, especially the migration that has low skills, they don't have very good jobs, and it is a social problem. It is a social problem because most of the people that have children, that their fathers have migrated to the USA, or their only children, they are not having a good education, not a very well education, but a good education. And you have to think in preparing the future work of those people, because right now they are children, but they are going to be, what type of jobs do you think that migration people must have? So it is very important to have a better education And as you know, in USA, the education, the public schools depends in the income of the place where they are. So I don't know how we can, or well, not me, but how it will be a good policy to share these migrants that comes not only from Mexico, but from Central America and from China or India, and what will be, I think it is a point that you have to work in your research. I don't know if you have already think about it. And also because most the women that immigration women that has lower skills, most of them make care work for older people and also for children. So how you can improve these workers also to have better skills, well, to take care of as nursery, or I don't know, but I think it's a working migration employment. It's a big diaspora, and maybe with the knowledge that you have, it will be very useful that one part of your research has, because it is not only, for example, employment in the UMSCA, it isn't. Even gender. It's incredible because for example, in a PEC agenda, in G20 agenda, gender is, and in the UMSCA agreement, you don't have the gender word. So I think we have to improve this, thinking that it is not only USA, it is the North American agreement. So that was my comment, and thank you very much. And I'm very happy to hear you, Deb, and congratulations. I hope then you can share us your PowerPoint. Very interesting. Thank you very much.
Alicia. As you know, Alicia, the jobs that are done by immigrants and Black and brown people are, if people are happy with what they're doing and they feel they are contributing to society, for example, by feeding us, I think that that's good work. And the problem is people have de-skilled that work or thought of it as unskilled when it's actually very skilled work. And unions would go a long way to improve working conditions in work in the fields and work in childcare centers and work with caring, and living wages, and raising the federal minimum wage to a living wage would go a long way. And improving the people who are giving rights, employment rights to the people who have been left out of the US Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938 and its subsequent amendments would go a long way. And here I'm talking about agricultural workers and domestic workers, and also workers who are disabled. So I agree with you, it's a big problem, but I wouldn't call it necessarily unskilled work. But we agree on that. So Brent has put a question in the chat, and then Christine's up next. How about a basic income? Yeah, I talk about this in the paper. I thought about a basic income. In fact, one of the things I did over the last couple of months, because I've been working on this paper for months now, is I wound up taking out basic income because I really think it's important when you look at the surveys that people want to work and they want meaningful work. So I swapped out basic income and I substituted for a universal child allowance, which I think in terms of triaging is a little bit more important right now. And also basic income, I write about this in the longer paper. The way some people have conceived of it, for example, Andrew Yang's freedom dividend, it's only for adults. It doesn't help children at all. So that concerns me with the costs of raising a child. But people have spent basic income dollars on things that families really need. So families are and communities have great needs. Thank you for the comment, Barbara Hopkins. Nice to see you. Christine has her hand up, right? Christine?
Yes.
Please go
yes,
ahead. Hello.
I did.
Hello,
I would love to ask
Christine.
a question.
Good
Hi,
to see
Deb.
you.
It's so nice to see you. I really love your talk, and I especially appreciate the definition of good work. And I just have to cite it again because I really love this definition. A good job is one that helps you create life and reinforce a positive sense of identity. I couldn't think of a better definition for good work. So thank you, you and Ellen, for your contribution. I just finished a series of interviews with small and medium firms in rural Pennsylvania, and they spoke to me with convictions about the cost of labor and how much that burdened their business. And these are small and medium-sized firms. We're not talking about Google or Facebook. And I just almost could hear the pain in the conversation about how much labor is a big issue. And so when I look at this setup policy solution that you suggest, I can't help wonder that these policies are not only good for the workers, but it should also be beneficial for their businesses themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder, and I think we talked about it at points in the previous past, but I wonder if there's a way to frame these policies to be a win-win strategy, both for the workers and the businesses, and therefore the social economy overall, rather than pitching the workers against the firms, because that's usually the sentiments I get talking to, rural businesses in Pennsylvania.
Yes, I hear you, Christine, and I get it. I think the last figure I read is that the cost of healthcare for General Motors adds something like $1,600 or $1,700 to the cost of every automobile. So I think there's a way we can frame universal healthcare as good for business in the long run. And there's a long running debate over the empirics of raising the minimum wage and how at the teeny micro level, firms like restaurants think, oh, I have to raise my prices, but they're not thinking of the aggregate demand effects and the growth effects of raising the minimum wage. And on balance, I think raising the minimum wage doesn't create much disemployment. And we're getting that message out. But there's no doubt that a couple of these things I'm recommending are regulations for employers, like paid sick leave. They have to pay. It's a basic human decency standard. What else? Paid family and medical leave. Well, that we can fund through a payroll deduction. So that's not coming out of the hides of employers either. But I hear you about getting the messaging out that where we can, equality and helping children and having better childcare so that workers don't have to call out sick, or there'll be less employee turnover and higher worker productivity. I hear you that we should get the message out that it benefits multiple parties. Thank you.
Deb.
Hi, Soray.
Hi, for some reason, my raised hand function doesn't seem to be working. So I've been meaning to congratulate you and tell you how much I appreciate the emphasis you put on sort of the balance between our needs to work on the one hand and our needs to, not the duality of work and life. And so as a result, I actually want to emphasize the importance of safety nets like basic income, because it doesn't have to be an alternative to child allowance. it can emphasize a sort of a public responsibility that we have to each other. And it's the same thing with health insurance. So so it's kind of a win-win in so many ways, but bringing the public sector back into the picture. It's the same thing with paid leave when you talk about people, payroll taxes. Everybody's sharing in the responsibility for paid leave because we need to care for each other. That is a function. We need to work, but we also need to care. So I would like to think that, a basic income, for instance, as a safety net is part of those 10 or top 10 or 12 things you could imagine.
Yeah, my friend, I'm not opposed to a small basic income. It didn't make it into the 10, maybe it would be 11 or 12. I'm not really opposed to it. I just think that if you look at what people want, and if you look at what people say gives them happiness, and I'm talking about happiness surveys all around the world, it's meaningful work. It's a sense of purpose. And it doesn't have to be paid work. It could be volunteerism in the community. But if most people in the US don't have $400 a month for emergencies, to cover unexpected medical bills, or if the car breaks down, then we need to talk about something like a universal child allowance and or a basic income. And I don't think $1,000 a month, but something so that you can deal with the unexpected expenses, so that a family could buy a prom outfit for their child, or so that maybe there's an unexpectedly high copay for a certain medication, although we need to revise American drug prices and big pharma and prescriptions, but that's another issue. But I hear you. I hear you. I don't know what I would cut to promote it to a top 10, because then you're playing with merging some things together. And I've already done that with workplace equality, but I hear you. I hear you. And it might be number 11. I don't know, but John Wisman would still keep pushing me to make a federal guarantee, job guarantee, number 11. Brent McClintock, can you unmute yourself and rephrase your question? It says, but whose work? Who gets to choose our work, employees or ourselves? Oh, well, I think we need to choose to the best of our ability what we would like to do in our lives, to find purpose in our lives. And it doesn't have to be the same thing all the time. Eric is reminding me that we have a hard stop at 7:30. The ASSA pulls the plug. So Barbara Hopkins, ask your question fast. Good to see you, Barbara. Thank you, Tonya.
Okay.
Hi, Barbara.
I have been having these conversations with, have been inviting people into my policy class because I can do that more easily with the remote. And so I was having a conversation with a bunch of feminist development people who were saying, work is not empowering. And that was part of their support for the idea of a basic income. And I have to say that I sort of come down on this on the same side that you do, but I know that your whole policy thing is about saying work should be empowering. And so by having good jobs, work would be empowering in that sense. And I agree with you that it seems to me that, that you need to start with basic income for kids. I mean, I've had the same sort of sense that, you know, that was what was wrong with Yang's thing, is because you need to start with, let's start with the people who can't, not only don't have jobs, but can't have jobs. And it wouldn't be good if they had jobs. Let's start with basic income for them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just want to sort of say that I feel I've sort of come on the same thinking that, and again, like Zora, I'm not opposed to basic income, but I agree with your sort of as starting that for kids. It makes sense to me.
I agree with you, Barb, and I'll leave it at this because we have a hard stop in probably about 30 seconds. You know how I was talking about kids do well in social settings and childcare with other kids? You know, we all have felt this during the pandemics. Workers like we academics do well in social settings with other academics. Don't give me a check to stay home. I need to go back to the classroom live. I need to go back to the office. I need to go play in the sandbox with other academics. Just don't give me a check to stay home. So that's my message about work and purpose is I want to do it, but I have a good job. I'm blessed with that. Thank you for all of your notes and questions in the chat and raising your hands, and thank you for your attention. Thanks again to Bill. I love you and all of my wonderful AFI friends. I hope to see you in Boston next year. All
Hi,
the best.
Bill. Hi, John.
Take care. So I'll be here until the ASSA pulls the plug, which should be very soon.